Here.
Fritz.
Here.
Fish.
Here.
Saltzman.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. So before we read the first item, just a couple of perfunctory comments with regard to decorum. Today is a hearing. It is fairly scripted in terms of when people speak and in what order they speak and for how long they speak, but the same council rules still come into play. You may or may not agree with what people are saying at the microphone, but we expect everybody to treat everyone with respect, whether we agree with them or disagree with them. We ask that there be no interruptions. Interruptions of either the deliberations of the city council or the testimony is grounds for expulsion. We obviously don't want that to happen. We want everybody to feel safe and welcome and respected here and have an opportunity to hear and to be heard. So with that, Carla, please read the one and only item for this afternoon session.
Item 1129, appeal of Northwest District Association against Design Commission's decision of approval for design review with modifications and master plan amendment for a new multi-story residential building with ground floor retail and a public square at 1417 Northwest 20th Avenue in the Conway Master Plan area of the Northwest Plan District, LU 16-100496 DZMMS.
All right, thanks, Carla. First, the city attorney is going to make some announcements about today's hearing.
Good afternoon. This is an evidentiary hearing. This means that you may submit new evidence to City Council in support of your argument. For an evidentiary hearing, we begin with the staff report by the Bureau of Development Services staff for approximately 10 minutes. Following the staff report, the City Council will hear from interested persons in the following order. The appellant will go first and will have 10 minutes to present its case. Following the appellant, persons who support the appeal will go next. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak to the City Council. The principal opponent, often the applicant, will have 15 minutes to address the City Council and rebut the appellant's presentation. If there is no principal opponent, the Council will move directly to testimony from persons who oppose the appeal after supporters of the appeal conclude their testimony. After the principal opponent, the Council will hear from persons who oppose the appeal. Again, each person will have 3 minutes. And finally, the appellant will have 5 minutes to rebut the presentation of the opponents of the appeal. Council may then close the hearing, deliberate, and take a vote on the appeal. If a tentative vote, the Council will set a future date for the adoption of findings and a final vote on the appeal. If the Council takes the final vote today, then that will conclude the matter before the Council. I would like to announce several guidelines for those who will be addressing City Council today. Submitting evidence into the record. Any letters or documents you wish to become a part of the record shall be given to the Council Clerk after you testify. The original copy or a copy of any slides, photographs, drawings, maps, videos, or other items you show to Council during your testimony, including PowerPoint presentations, should be given to the Council Clerk to make sure they become a part of the record. Testimony must be directed to the approval criteria. Any testimony, arguments, or evidence you present must be directed toward the applicable approval criteria for this land use review or other criteria in the City's comprehensive plan or zoning code that you believe apply to the decision. The BDS staff will identify the applicable approval criteria as a part of their staff report to the City Council. Issues must be raised with specificity. You must raise an issue clearly enough to give Council and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue. If you don't, you will be precluded from appealing to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. The applicant must identify constitutional challenges to conditions of approval. If the applicant fails to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval, sufficiently to allow Council to respond, the applicant will be precluded from bringing an action for damages in circuit court.
Very good, thank you. And Carla, are you taking signups in here or are they outside?
They're still outside.
Okay, so if anybody wants to sign up for one of those 3-minute time slots, either as supporters of the appeal or opponents of the appeal, if you could, at your convenience, make your way outside and sign up on the appropriate list, and we'll make sure you get called upon. Do any members of the Council wish to declare a conflict of interest? No Council members are declaring any conflict of interest. Do any members of the Council have ex parte contacts to declare information gathered outside of this hearing to disclose? Commissioner Fritz?
I had some discussions with park staff in the springtime, none recently, and my staff have had discussions with various people recently.
Does anybody present in the chambers wish to ask Commissioner Fritz about her her disclose ex parte contacts. Any other commissioners? There are no other commissioners who wish to declare an ex parte contact. Do the council members have any other matters that need to be discussed before we begin the hearing? And I will just say I know many of the players here, but I have no financial benefit from this application whatsoever. And with that, we will commence the staff report first. 10 minutes, please. Good afternoon. Name for the record.
Hello, Mr. Mayor, Commissioners.
Hello.
Hillary Adam, BDS, Bureau of Development Services. I'm going to present the staff report and ultimately the decision of the Design Commission. Just to give you a heads up, this is the order that I'm going to give my presentation. We're going to talk about the regulatory framework. I'll give you a summary of the proposal, a little context for the project, and a summary of the appeal, and then finally we'll get into appeal response. So this project is in the Conway Master Plan, which was approved August 27th, 2012. The Conway Master Plan dictates development in a subsection of the Northwest District Plan. And the approval criteria for sites within the Conway Master Plan are Section 5 of the Conway Master Plan. And for amendments to that master plan, it's approval criteria 1 through 3 of Section 8 of the Conway Master Plan. And in general, the community design guidelines are also approval criteria. And there's also modification approval criteria for 5 specific modifications that the applicant requested. And I'll get into those later. So the zoning for the site is central employment with design overlay. Again, it's in the Conway Master Plan area, which sets standards for development in that area that ultimately supersede standards that are in the Northwest Plan District and in the EX zone. The maximum floor area ratio for the entire Conway Master Plan is 3-to-1 maximum. And height on the specific site is limited to 47 feet on the southwest corner and 77 feet on the east and north. And I have a map that shows you where those limits are specifically. So everywhere in red here is the Conway Master Plan. This is the site area, these 2 elongated blocks, and this is the project site area in this red box here. So the site area is about 67,000 square feet, and it includes the western portion of Quimby, which is right now a private street, undeveloped. The existing site has a 1-story warehouse building on it that will be demolished, as well as surface parking lots. And it is bound by Northwest 21st on the west, Northwest Pettygrove on the south, and Quimby undeveloped to the north. And then further to the east is Northwest 20th. A little background on the project on this site. We first had a pre-application conference in January of 2015. Pre-application conference is required for any type 3 design review. The project then went through 3 design advice requests with the Design Commission. At that time, it had a different design team, but a lot of the same issues were discussed in the general layout, similar to what was ultimately proposed. These images here are the first and second, and really the third design advice. Commission felt at that time that the proposal deviated from the master plan. In this image here, this portion of the building extended a full 60 feet into what was supposed to be a neighborhood park. The commission was not comfortable with that. It also extended 12 to 15 feet into the north on Quimby. Through the second and third design advice, it was scaled back a bit. And the commission, the commission noted that they really wanted neighborhood support for the project. And the neighborhood response was split for each of these versions. So in May 2016, we were supposed to have our first design review hearing for this project here. Staff recommended denial because there were still some issues that needed to be worked out. The applicant postponed the hearing, decided to work with a different design team, and then ultimately came back with a different design, which is this. This went to the Design Commission on May 4th of this year. Staff recommended denial again. There were a number of issues. The commission supported the staff report. We had a work session with a subcommittee of Design Commission members, 3 members from the Northwest District Association and the applicant and PBOT and BDS staff. And we worked out some agreements that the Design Commission subcommittee felt that the applicant could move forward from, and there was tentative support and also not support for what came out of that meeting. July 6th, we had our second, but the third hearing, but only the second that we actually had. Commission supported the proposal at that time, mostly because the building, the public square that's required to go between or on this site was widened to provide 100 feet in between this wing and this wing. And that did result in encroachment into the neighborhood park on the east side. But the commission supported that. At that hearing, the record was requested to be held open. And so we returned August 3rd. And at that time, commission voted 5-0 for approval with conditions. The appeal was submitted September 1st, and that's why we're here today.
Could you summarize? Never mind. You're going right to it. Sorry.
Okay.
Continue.
So the proposal is for a building that's ultimately 7 stories tall on 2 wings. It has almost 10,000 square feet of ground floor retail, 201 residential units, below-grade parking, roof terrace, and the proposal also develops a square in the middle of the project. They will develop the western portion of Quimby and a portion of the neighborhood park. This map down here shows you the extent of the neighborhood park as it was envisioned in the master plan. It was to be 200 by 260 feet long, and then this was going to be 200 by 200 feet. So down here, the master plan amendment that they are requesting is to encroach into the western 15 feet of that neighborhood park. They're also requesting a number of modifications to mostly master plan standards, and that is, actually, I will just go into these in my future slides so I don't have to repeat it twice. So the first modification that they're requesting is to Master Plan Standard 1, and that is to increase the maximum height from 47 to 57 feet for a penthouse amenity on the lower portion of the building. That is this building here, and that is the penthouse. You can see it here in the rendering. And this is the map that shows where 47 feet is limited and the rest is 77. They also requested a modification to reduce the required setback of the upper floor of the east and south facades of the east wing from 5 feet to 0. And that would have been this wall here, the top floor being set back 5 feet, and this wall here facing the park to be set back 5 feet. Commission found both of those modifications were supportable.
What was the approval criteria for those modifications?
That they meet the purpose of the standard and that they better meet the approval criteria, which would have been the guidelines.
So not
for-
having the setback.
Well, okay, so for this one to not have the setbacks, there is a clear articulation of this frame element for these buildings. And so having that setback on this side and on this side would have disrupted the coherency of that frame expression. So the commission found that that was supportable. there.
Thank you.
And then for this, previously, this amenity space had been shown along this wall, which created less active uses for the square. And because this shows relatively little shadow effect on the square than the building itself would have, Commission found that supportable. For the other modifications, to Standard 7, to reduce the 50-foot depth requirement for retail fronting on the square, that would be for this wing and this wing, and to reduce the amount of retail neighborhood facilities fronting on the square along this north-facing wall. Commission found those supportable. Pretty much reduction of the retail width was found supportable at the design advice request stage. Commission recognized that it would be difficult to get the required 100-foot width on the square and have it framed by two sides of retail if you had to maintain that 50-foot depth for the retail and the 100-foot requirement for the square. For this, again, as I said, there were additional amenities proposed here before that were moved on top of this building. So there's, I'm going to go over, I apologize.
Actually, staff report is allowed to go
Okay.
over.
I thought it was moving.
The
Okay.
10 minutes is approximate. We like you to keep it as close as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We found that this was supportable because there's ultimately 75 feet or 75% of retail wrapping around the square and neighborhood facilities. It was just on this phase that it was diminished, and this is the residential lobby. And then for Standard 10, to reduce the dimensions on the square at the southwest corner here to 31'6", and to reduce the clearance of the ground plane connection here. Commission found that that was supportable because this then serves to act as a threshold or an entry point into the square from 21st. Previously, this portion had been here, and then this was covered. There was a walkway through here that was covered by building, and Commission felt that this opened up the square more. And then for here, again, they felt that if you pushed this breezeway up, it would have disrupted this frame or tube-like expression. And for the master plan amendment, again, here is what the master plan shows is supposed to be neighborhood park. This is the proposal that encroaches 15 feet. This red line would be that 200-foot line, so this would be the previous line for the extent of the development. Commission felt that that was supportable because it allowed for the square to be more open to the sun.
So what will the total be, 185 by 200 or 260?
It's about 212 because they had to give a 3-foot dedication on the west, so 200 plus 15 minus 3, 212 by 200 north-south.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Here's just some context photos. These are all developments that have recently gone up in Conway or are currently under construction. This is Q21 directly to the west across Northwest 21st. This is just outside of Conway, as is this, which is to the south. Here are some additional buildings in the neighborhood. This is the Design Commission decision. They applied a number of conditions. I can go more into that if you wish later. I'm going to move on. And the appellant, they have stated that the approval criteria are not met, and they're requesting that the City Council reverse the Design Commission decision. They have raised these 3 major issues, and I'm going to go through each one of these. The first issue is that the master plan requirements in the development area are not met. And they have stated that the proposal has more building area than is allowed on the site, and the proposal does not provide the required public open spaces. The proposal does meet the or it doesn't exceed the maximum FAR on the site. This is a larger site, and so the development area ultimately was about 2.73 to 1. Just wanted to note here that the decision stated a slightly different number, this 182,276 square feet. And the applicant alerted me that it's actually just a little bit higher, but it's still less than the maximum allowed, 200,460 square feet on that site. And then also the master plan amendment allows for amendments to the plan and allows for modifications to the standards. I'm not going to go into each of these. I'm sure the appellant will, but they have raised a number of concerns, such as the square's openness to the sky, visual connection to the park, concerns that the square is not enclosed, concerns about the Quimby Festival Street and the interaction with vehicles, access, concerns that the square is not providing access to sidewalks and nearby pedways, that it's not providing a lively public realm, and that it's not providing the desired urban character of the district. And finally, the applicant has stated that the design review process should require filing a new application and that it did not comply with the required procedure. This proposal, or the applicant requested an extension beyond the typical 365 days. And that occurred after they changed design teams. They wanted more time to rework the proposal. Staff checked with the city attorneys and found that that is possible to extend that timeline. The appellant has also raised concerns that this would allow developers to not meet the inclusionary housing regulations that went into effect in February. And for this site specifically, the Conway Master Plan was vested on August 27, 2012, and is not subject to the inclusionary housing regulations.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is there anything in the record about why the applicant changed the design team? And in particular, is there anything that indicates they did so in order to address some of the concerns that were raised either by the public or by the design commission?
There's nothing in the record that speaks to that specifically, but LRS was a part of the development team from the beginning. They were at the pre-application conference, so it wasn't a complete shift. They just became lead designer after the first staff report was issued.
Okay.
So these are your alternatives. You can deny the appeal and uphold the design commission's decision. You can uphold the appeal and request revisions to the design that would modify the design commission's decision, or you can grant the appeal and overturn the design commission's decision that would deny the project. And that's it for me, unless you have questions.
Very good, colleagues. Excellent. Thank you for your presentation. Next, the appellant, 10 minutes.
Oh, I apologize. Bob Haley from Peabody is here if you have any transportation-related questions. He is here till 3:30.
Great.
Thank you.
Colleagues, any immediate questions for Bob on the transportation front? Very good, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Give me a second to pull
No
up
worries.
my,
You bet.
it's this one here, right? Yeah. Why does it look so funny? Oh, because it's been shrunk. Okay. We don't want it shrunk. Oh, I was gonna do it that way. Thanks.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Carlson. I am the president of the Northwest District Association. Let me start. The Conway Master Plan established for the redevelopment of 21 acres of underutilized industrial land into a vibrant mixed-use neighborhood. It was highly praised as a high-water mark for collaboration between public and private interests. The master plan also, the master plan also represents an underlying agreement. This agreement established a mechanism for the creation of public open spaces. It does this by providing for the flexible transfer of building area density off the open spaces and onto the development sites in the master plan area. The success of the 3 public open spaces that Block 290 accommodates is essential to the success of the neighborhood envisioned by the master plan. I was just at a lecture by Ed McMahon of the Urban Land Institute, and he said, "Communities grow by chance or choice." The Conway Master Plan is choice. It's a community planned around its public open space. Our public open spaces are the hearts of our community. It is the public open spaces that time and time again, when people are asked what makes their community, they don't say it's the buildings, they say it's places they can gather, places they can meet their neighbors, enjoy the outdoors, and more. To compromise our public spaces is to compromise our community. This is why we're appealing this development. This proposal has numerous deviations to the master plan. There are 5 modifications to the master plan and 1 amendment, plus there are other standards that have been ignored. These deviations to the master plan compromise the success of the major public open spaces and affect the whole community. We oppose changing the use of the Festival Street, reducing the amount of open space to place private development in the park, eliminating connections to other open space in the neighborhood, reducing the size of the square, increasing building height, reducing retail frontage on the square, removing the setback of the upper floor, and decreasing the height of the connection to the park. So why are these amendments and modifications granted? Well, first, the burden of proof is on the applicant. The applicant must prove that it is better to have no Festival Street, better to reduce the size of the park and expand private development, to have fewer connections, a smaller square, a taller building, less retail, less activation on the square, a smaller, shorter, darker entrance between the park and the square. I will talk in detail next about why we believe the applicant has shown no public benefit for these changes and why the Design Commission should not have approved these modifications and master plan amendment. The Joseph Roundtree Foundation researched the social value of public spaces. They found that public spaces play a vital role in the social and economic life of communities. Whether it is enjoying a busy street scene or a quiet time sitting on a park bench, a place to meet and play, or just hang out, all have important benefits that help create local attachments and which are at the heart of a sense of community. This is what's compromised by this proposal. I will start with the Quimby Festival Street, one of the 3 open spaces on Block 290. The design of this parcel is important in that it envisioned to have special qualities that allow it to be a successful link to the neighborhood park and square on the south with private development on the north. It is meant to provide a location to host farmers market, art walk, or other programmed neighborhood events. The current proposal turns the street into access for the building's underground parking, making festival use impossible. Now to the neighborhood park. A master plan amendment was approved to reduce the boundaries of designated public open space and increase the boundaries of the private development site. This is achieved by encroaching 15 feet into the neighborhood park. This loss of 3,000 square feet of park, on top of turning the adjacent 9,000 square feet into an extension of the pedestrian connection to the north, represents a loss of green space that this park-deficient area sorely needs. There is never public benefit to the loss of green space, and this is not consistent with the master plan vision and purpose. Now I'd like to focus on the square. A key failure of the proposed square is its lack of connections. A successful square reaches out like an octopus and draws the community into it. In this proposal, there are no connections to the north, and the users are directed to walk around the buildings. They are not invited into the square. Early proposals for the site recognize the critical need for connections. This one does not. No modification was requested, nor did the city staff or design commission require it, but it is clear this square fails to meet standard 10A. A modification was approved for standard 10B, which requires a minimum dimension of the square of 100 feet. This was done so that that small area in the entrance to the square from the southwest corner could be considered part of the square. Thus, the required size of the square could be met. Reducing a required dimension 68% is not better, and we do not agree that the entrance is part of the square. The actual square is not the required 16,000 square feet, but closer to 13,000 square feet, 18% smaller than required by standard 10B. There is no public benefit to a smaller square. The connection between the square and the park must be sufficient in height and width to allow generous daylight, air, and visual connection. This is done by requiring that the passage be broad in width and more than a single floor in height. The modification to reduce the height of the connection between the square and park from 25 feet to 15 feet only creates a lower, darker, and less inviting passage between the park and the square. The height of the buildings to the south and the west of the square are restricted to allow sufficient midday and afternoon sunlight to reach the square. The standard requires these buildings to be no more than 4 floors in height. Increasing the height, adding another floor to the building that can cast more shadow on the square, is not consistent with the purpose of allowing maximum light into the square. Taller is not better for anyone but the applicant. More shadow is not better. Nothing is more important to the success of a public square than the social interactions that it brings to the community. Requiring 3/4 of the frontage on each side of the square be devoted to publicly accessible commercial uses that can animate the zone directly outside their lease area is a vital step in bringing about those social interactions. Reducing the amount of retail or neighborhood facilities from 75% to 38% and using the remaining frontage as an entrance lobby and amenity space for the building residents creates a dead zone. Privatizing frontage on the square does not better animate the square, and it does not provide a better, greater level of social interaction. It is simply not consistent with the purpose of the standard. The first guideline in the master plan is to provide human scale to buildings. By requiring a step back on any building taller than 6 stories, you preserve a human scale to buildings by reducing the feel of the building mass. Removing the step back does not create a more pleasant pedestrian environment. A less human-scaled facade is not better. It is not consistent with the purpose of the standard to reinforce the pedestrian-oriented environment. Slabtown Square is the heart and soul of Block 290 West. The buildings are there to provide enclosure and to activate the square. The buildings are larger than the master plan allows and compromises the public realm. It requires all these deviations from the master plan that are not better than the master plan requires. They may be better than the prior proposal, but they do not provide more public benefit. By reducing the size of the square, not providing connections to the community, having taller buildings creating more shade, having less active uses facing the square, by failing to meet all of these critical standards, simply turns what should be, and I quote from the master plan, a significant, iconic urban place into merely a private courtyard. Thank you.
Can I ask you one question on that last point? In the earlier presentation, we were told there was an easement to ensure public access. Does that easement require 24/7 access?
I don't believe it's 24/7 access. I think it's supposed to be a negotiated access plan.
So that's a question I'll pose to someone to follow. And, this is interesting, it's noteworthy to me that the Design Commission voted 5-0. And we've had some actually interesting debates recently where there's been occasionally disagreement with the Design Commission on one thing or another. But you seem to be challenging basically all of the decisions they made, and yet they are a body that we delegate to make recommendations, and they got to a 5-0 vote. So why do you think they got it so wrong?
I think, based on the findings, that they felt obligated to help the developer make a financially feasible project, and that they recognized that what was being, what the final presentation that they approved was better than what had been presented before, and they felt like they had made great strides. Unfortunately, what the criteria is not better than what was before, but it's supposed to be better than what the master plan requires. And we don't see that these things are better than the master plan requires.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Very good. Thank you for your presentation. And I want to note that you had an additional 8 seconds left.
I had about 3 minutes more that I could say, but,
Very good.
Great job.
Thank you. Supporters of the appeal, 3 minutes each, and if you'd like to sign up and have not, you can do so with Carla over here, our council clerk. First 3, please.
We have a total of 5. The
Very
first
good.
3 are Suzanne Leonard, Ron Walters, and Rick Michelson.
Very good. And if you could just state your name for the record, we don't need your address, and you'll see a set of lights here in the center. When you have 30 seconds left, it'll turn yellow. When your time is up, it will turn red.
Yes. You have a different format than I laid it out to.
Very good.
It's
Would you like to
expanded.
start for us?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm Suzanne Leonard. Hello, Commissioner, Mayor. I'm an expert on neighborhood squares. I've written many articles and books about it, and I've been involved with the Conway development for 7 years. The master plan requires a square for the neighborhood, not a courtyard. A neighborhood square is the community's living room. It's a place that people pass through on their way to work or to school, where serendipitous conversations develop, where children play, where elders hang out, where people meet in the evening over a drink or a meal or coffee. It brings the community together. Neighborhood squares have many social functions, preventing social isolation, especially among the elderly, teaching children social skills, developing social networks, and generating community. They're very, very important for a neighborhood square. This is a housing project with a courtyard, not a neighborhood square, and I'll explain why. The proportions of a square are required to be the height of the building should be 1/3 the width of the square. This creates what I call a sky view island, an area in the square that ensures sun and from which you can see the sky above all the surrounding buildings. Here is a square that is exactly the same size as the required in the master plan, 16,000 square feet. It's Plaza de John Lennon in Barcelona. It has 4 entrances from each corner. It has a large sunny sky view island, that's the purple area in the middle. It's very successful, as you can see. It's surrounded by mixed use, shops and restaurants and stores at the ground floor and people living above. As you can see, there are buildings on all 4 sides. And the buildings are 4 and 6 stories high, but above the 4th floor, the buildings are set back for 2 more stories so that the sun can come in and that the sky view island is preserved. This is a courtyard, not a square. A big problem is that the building creates a barrier to the north and to the west, preventing people from entering, so there's no possibility of paths crossing and people meeting. The buildings are too high to allow sun access and the view of the sky. The purple Skyview Island has almost disappeared. The tunnel connecting the courtyard and the park is too low and will be unfriendly and encourage homeless and social problems. And the square is dominated by the private lobby. As you come in from the front, it looks like a private space. It belongs to the building, not to the general community. So this is a housing project with a courtyard, not a neighborhood square.
Very good. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for your testimony. We appreciate it. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Ron Walters.
I'm sorry, Ron, is your mic on? Can you,
Yeah, I had it. I got it.
oh, it's good?
It's to be
Good to
good.
go. Sorry.
All
Go
better?
ahead.
All right. Good afternoon. I recognize three of you from 2012, so it's great to have some consistency. My name is Ron Walters. I live at 2057 Northwest Overton Street. I was NWDA president and co-chair of the NWDA Slabtown Committee when the master plan was developed, but my testimony today is personal. I strongly oppose the applicant's proposal because it dramatically fails to meet the minimum requirements of the public spaces in the Conway Master Plan. As proposed, these public spaces will be severely diminished in size and quality, unattractive for neighborhood use, and largely unsuccessful for their community uses. The amount of public input that went into the Slabtown Plan and subsequent Conway Master Plan was breathtaking. From 2010 to 2012, hundreds of people participated in 6 public workshops and 3 online surveys which helped define the community's desires for the master plan area. The community's clear #1 priority was parks, squares, and open spaces. As a result, the city, Conway, and NWDA worked collaboratively and enthusiastically approved a master plan that defined standards for a public park, neighborhood square, and Festival Street on Block 290. The master plan is the reasonable compromise between the city, the original landowner, and the community. Unfortunately, the applicant is seeking numerous modifications to the master plan that would reduce the size, quality, and utility of these public spaces. As we've already heard, for these modifications to be approved, the applicant must show that their proposed changes better meet the design review criteria, and it is their burden. To see how the community actually feels about these proposed changes to their public space, I personally conducted 4 online surveys during the course of the design review with a total of 451 respondents. In short, the community is overwhelmingly opposed to the changes. 96% of respondents oppose reducing the size of the park. Let me repeat that. 96% of the respondents oppose reducing the size of the park. 91% oppose reducing the size and dimensions of the square. 90% oppose diminishing the utility of the Festival Street. 89% believe the square will not receive enough sunlight. 85% believe the buildings around the square are too big. And 83% believe the square does not feel cozy, warm, or welcoming. It's clear that the community does not think this proposal is better than the master plan. It should be clear to everyone that the burden has not been met. Furthermore, the proposal lacks what the master plan calls necessary facilities, namely schools, community centers, libraries, and daycare facilities. This proposal has none of these features, which were also identified by the community as desirable amenities for the neighborhood square. I won't get into the square measurements in detail. It's already been cited by NWDA that it does not meet the 6,000 square foot measurement. By even the most generous standards using the applicant's own measurements that were provided to me by BDS, there is no way to get to 16,000 square feet, and it may be as little as 13,000. On behalf of 451 survey respondents and myself, I urge City Council to affirm the appeal and refer the proposal back to BDS and Design Commission until it meets, or hopefully even better meets, the master plan requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Rick Michelson. I've been involved in master plans in the city of Portland since the 1980s. I worked closely on the River District Plan. I later chaired the North Macadam Planning Task Force to develop the South Waterfront area. The key to all of our successful master plans is you start with the streets, the public spaces, and the parks, and you design the buildings to meet those, not the other way around. This one is the other way around. The developer is starting with their development scheme and trying to squeeze the square around it. A real little example of this is in the design of the building. Hillary spoke to the fact that the design of this building would not accommodate the setback and would not accommodate the raised thing. Well, if the developer has chosen a style building that won't meet the zoning laws, why are we changing the zoning rules instead of telling the developer to pick another style of building? I watched this process, and in every case, when new things came in, there became more and more development and less square. It just went backwards. And the Design Commission seemed really concerned with making the pro forma for the building work and adjusting their tasks and requirements to that rather than meeting their public responsibility. As a longtime member of the Design Commission, I could tell you a couple of reasons why this went wacky, but I don't have the time to do that today. You're probably going to hear arguments about the importance of this housing and how we have to do everything we can because we have a housing emergency. Well, I agree we have a housing emergency and we need to do whatever we can, but not by sacrificing the long-term health of the city as a whole. In this case, in particular, we don't need these housing units of the type they're proposing in general as market rate units because we already have a glut of them in the neighborhood. There are already too many market rate units. In addition, there's plenty of room in the Conway Master Plan for more housing than you could imagine with the FAR that's supposed to be moved there from this site and elsewhere. Finally, you'll hear the promise of affordable housing. Well, the affordable housing that's going into this program only has a 10-year commitment. So there's a 10-year commitment for affordable housing that'll do harm to a 50-year square. That's not the right balance. You would not allow housing development in a square in the Pearl like allowing housing development to extend into Jameson Square. Please don't allow that to happen to our neighborhood square. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. Next, you said there's two more, is
Two
that
more,
correct?
yes.
Very good.
Aaron Riddle and Stephen Ramos.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Shall I begin?
Yeah, please, thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler and Commissioners. So I have an office in the Northwest neighborhood, which is not too...
Could you put your name in the record?
Aaron Riddle. Yes. I have an office in Northwest Portland, not too far from the project site. And over the past 6 years at that location at 23rd and Kearney, I've really watched the Northwest District grow tremendously. Many new multifamily housing developments have cropped up, densifying the area and bringing life and vibrancy to our streets. But when I think of open space in this area, there's very few places that come to mind. As the area continues to develop, the need to secure more of that open space becomes essential. I want to tell you a little bit about my background as well. I have a bachelor's and a master's degree in landscape architecture from the University of Oregon. And after graduation, I went on to work at a local design firm where I was an urban designer for 7 years. I also happened to write my master's on urban squares. So, when I worked as an urban designer, our firm focused on designing downtowns and neighborhoods all across the country. And in every successful case, the central organizing elements were those public open spaces and the public streets. And so today I want to voice some concerns that I have in the design of this Conway plan, really around two particular issues. One is the ability to secure adequate open space for this neighborhood, and the other is to ensure that the design will be safe, accessible, active, and feel public. So on the topic of securing adequate space, it is my understanding that the current proposal reduces the size of the square, which was previously approved. We've gone over that a few times now, as well as compromising the usability of a portion of Festival Street by requiring it as the sole access to their underground parking. Many of us know all too well that once the opportunity to secure open space is lost to private development, that there's rarely an opportunity to reclaim it. This is the reason why designers put master plans in place. So I would hope that every consideration is made to ensure that this Northwest District receives the usable and interconnected square footage of open space that was assured to them in the master plan. And lastly, on the topic of the square's design, It's not just about having enough open space, the quality of the design, the connectedness of the design, the visibility, the safety, all of those are critical elements. And in reviewing the design that's been put in place here, I can see a lot of missing, a lot of the criteria is missing. There are nods to it, certainly. But if you look at the most successful designs of squares, like the Barcelona example that was shown earlier, we're missing a lot of those design factors in this plan, and I would hope that that is considered as part of this decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, my name is Stephen Ramos, and I live in the Northwest District at 2454 Northwest Westover Road. In prior lifetimes, I was a lawyer and a planning commissioner, so I do have some understanding about the constraints that are on this property and the challenges that are faced by both the developer and the government officials who are charged with enforcing the Conway Master Plan. However, it is the Conway Master Plan that is the defining document that describes what we're supposed to see on this site. And I'd like to say definitively, I do not oppose development on Block 290 or any other site. On the contrary, I want to see the project succeed, but success is defined by the master plan, and the master plan emphasizes the development of the public spaces on this site. The site was chosen as a keystone location in order to promote not only the activities of public spaces, but the interconnection between those public spaces and the surrounding neighborhood. The current proposal disintegrates all of those pieces and so renders them really non-functional. So I would say this. The master plan represents the vision to foster the integration of the new community within our community. Our goal is to enhance the interface and interrelation of the new development with the existing community. We want our friends, neighbors, and fellow citizens to visit the new community, meet our new neighbors, and welcome, embrace, and befriend the newest members of our community. To this end, the public spaces required by the master plan are indeed sacrosanct, as they provide the sense of place and belonging to be shared by all of us. Our primary concern is the long-term vitality, livability, and viability of our neighborhood, not just as it is now, but as it continues to grow and evolve. Our goal is consistent with increasing long-term social and economic value, maintaining the Northwest District as a vibrant and desirable place to live and do business. Properly executed public spaces enhance the value of private land, not diminish it. If we have a disagreement with the applicant, it is that we are committed to long-term economic and societal prosperity, whereas the developer, understandably, is focused on short-term profitability. To be clear, I do not begrudge him that. However, as a community, we should not be compelled to sacrifice the vision and public benefit embodied in the master plan to bail out or subsidize the developer's short-term financial objectives. Unfortunately, cannibalizing the public square, institutionalizing trespass on what is supposed to be a festival street, and privatizing the public square and disintegrating those really essentially amounts to a shift of public value to private profit. And I urge you to please grant the appeal.
Thank you. Both of you, appreciate your testimony. Anybody else who is a supporter of the appeal who would like to testify? Very good. Next, we'll hear from the principal opponent, 15 minutes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. For your record, my name is Tim Ramus.
Excuse me, Tim, we'll be
yes.
charged your time, but can we move one of these over here so I can see it?
Yes. You bet.
Do you mind moving one of those slides over here so Dan and I can see it? Thank you.
For your record, my name is Tim Ramus. I'm a lawyer and I'm the counsel for this project. With me is Greg Mitchell, who is the project designer from LRS Architects, and Tom Brennicky from Guardian Real Estate, the project owner. This case comes to you after 6 public proceedings of the Design Commission, over 30 direct meetings with representatives of NWDA, 39 months of effort by the development team, and a critical 2.5-hour design consultation between 3 representatives of NWDA, a subcommittee of the Design Commission, and representatives of city bureaus. The result of that meeting was the configuration of building and square, which you see today. That meeting produced a project which will bring 200 units of housing to the city and a lasting amenity in the form of the public square. The Design Commission concluded that it meets all of the 16,000 square foot requirement for the square, and that it falls within the FAR limitations for the site. Our opponents argue the square is essentially too small, and that at 200 units, too much is packed into the building, making it too big. Their arguments fall essentially into 2 categories. The first is the ongoing disagreement about how to best solve the problem of the competing burdens that are placed on this property. The second is a series of arguments that are outside the actual legal criteria of the case, and I'd like to spend a couple minutes with those because they attempt to set up a straw man, knock them down, and claim that means something, and I'd like to talk about those 4 points so we can make sure they don't distract from the central issues in the case. The first is the often repeated claim, which is in the appeal, that the applicant is driven by a goal of avoiding the city's affordable housing requirements. That's wrong on 2 counts. First, as the staff has pointed out, those requirements do not apply on this site, do not apply within the Conway property. But second, and more importantly, this applicant has included 40 units of housing under the city's multi-program. And I will give you the documents that demonstrate both of those points. Our point is that this part of the appeal is baseless, and we would hope the responsible leadership of NWDA would disavow it. Second, there is the claim that the size of the square has been mismeasured because the parts that are subject to rain protection shouldn't be counted because they're not, quote, open to the sky. And the critical point there is that there is no legal requirement of being open to the sky for the square. It doesn't appear in the plan, it doesn't appear in the code, it's simply not a rule that applies in this case. There is a good question about how much of the square should be subject to rain protection, and people disagreed throughout the process on that, but the Design Commission made a judgment on that, and so partially the square is protected. The next argument is that there is some sort of special FAR limitation on this block that the project violates. And again, as with the open to the sky requirement, there is no such special requirement that appears anywhere in the code. It doesn't appear anywhere in the plan. There's no special FAR limitation. The staff and the commission were correct in concluding that the project as proposed is well within the FAR limits of the city's regulations. The fourth is the claim that you see in some places that the project is using public land for private benefit. This is incorrect because none of this block has ever been in public ownership. I will provide you with a copy of the plat, which shows that from the time it was platted, the entire 460-foot length of the block was in private ownership. The critical fact that I think that's important here is that the design provides 65% of the site for public access. And my understanding in answer to your question is that it's a 24/7 access.
So, Mr. Ramus, I want to make sure I'm not getting lost in all the claims and the numbers. Under this proposal, what's the square footage of the plaza?
We will cover that in detail in Mr. Mitchell's presentation.
And you'll contrast that with what was originally proposed in the master plan?
Yes, we can do that.
And then are you going to also address a question that has been nagging me, which is this driven by design considerations or the economics of the development project? And what is appropriate for us to consider?
I think that both are driving the project in this sense.
Excuse me for one
This-
second. I would really appreciate if they can get their questions out, because otherwise they're going to be
But we can extend the clock, Commissioner, but any member of this panel has the right to ask a question, and I just want to frame it up before we get there.
And just to be clear, when we ask questions, we're stopping the clock. Carla's being very diligent about that.
That's my
Just
concern,
preview
though.
for me
Yeah,
so I
yes.
can
I think
follow the argument.
The critical thing from a policy standpoint, the critical question is, how can you provide this public amenity and get it built by the private sector? And the challenge for the site is to create enough economic viability on the parts that are privately developed that it can carry the load, that it can pay for the public amenities. That's the balance challenge.
But again, I'm going to signal a little bit where I'm going to need some help here. We have a history of doing master planning for public spaces and plazas and then expanding them through the course of the development, not shrinking them. We expanded the footprint of the fields by working with the developer. We expanded the footprint for Director Park by extending the park to the lot line, so the entire plaza could be used for a public purpose. So, and I've had a hand in both. So I'm familiar with expanding the footprint to meet a public purpose. One of the concerns I have here is we're talking about shrinking a footprint.
All right.
And therefore, I think under the code, at least I'm going to have to be persuaded there's a compelling public benefit.
We would want.
Maybe that'd be part of your presentation.
We accept that, that's our burden.
Okay.
But I want to be clear that the measurement here is not the 13,000 square feet that's been suggested, the argument being made that you're required to do 16,000, you're only doing 13. As you will see from our demonstration, the site, the square, is 16,000 square feet. It meets that standard. We're not reducing it in size.
Okay.
That's not part of the application.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Let Mr. Mitchell take over now.
Right. Thank you, Tim. For the record, Greg Mitchell, LRS Architects, 720 Northwest Davis, Portland, Oregon. Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. I'd just like to say, first and foremost, just make sure that you've got everything in front of you and addresses the open space, and we're having a little bit of technical difficulty, so I can't open the electronic copy of this file, but I think you have in front of you an exhibit that looks somewhat like this. It has an illustrative that is in blue, and what that indicates to you is the open space dedicated over with this development, and that it does in fact meet all the requirements of the master plan. Another general statement I would like to make as well at this time is that you also have a bound copy, and I'll only be referring to a few of the diagrams and content. I call this the Reader's Digest of the greater volume. These are excerpts directly out of our DR package. I don't think you guys wanted to read all the text in there, so we just pulled out the relevant pieces for you as reference. And again, I won't be touching on all those. Okay, general statement. At the time that LRS was brought in to design this project, it was our design team's mission to design this project to try to follow the master plan to the greatest extent possible, and where the master plan does not specifically address the issue, to use applicable sections of Title 33 of the Development Code. And in fact, we would actually be on the same side with the appellant as far as that is our guideline. We are to follow the master plan to the greatest extent possible. We're divergent is what's in the master plan and what is not. I would like to also thank the BDS staff for their 2+ year commitment to this project, and also the Design Review Commission for working constructively on a very difficult project. I'll now try to go item by item through the appellant's appeal. Open space, again, the exhibit in front of you is highlighted. Design meets or exceeds the master plan requirements and does address striking a balance. 2, scale of the building. The building conforms to the allowable FAR and is under the 77-foot height limit. It's actually 76 foot 6 inches to be technical. And the additional 10 feet of height was requested to activate the low roof and provide resident amenities which were removed from the ground floor to add more retail commercial space fronting on the square and Northwest 21st as required in the master plan. 3, required commercial at the ground floor. The plan provides for active uses on 3 sides of the square as prescribed in the master plan. Additionally, it meets the active use requirements on Northwest 21st as outlined in the master plan. And contrary to what's inferred, the applicant is not using any trade-offs on the ground floor active uses to generate more FAR. Item 4, square connectivity and solar access. The square fronts on Northwest Pettygrove, as well as the portions of Northwest 21st, and provides direct access from the right-of-ways. The square is oriented to the south to take full advantage of the late morning and afternoon sun. You can't get much better open space orientation than a southern exposure here in the Pacific Northwest. Any other orientation of the square would be a compromise as to sun access in the course of the day and from winter to summer. Additionally, the plan provides for the east connection directly to the park from the square. Where we did request a modification to the height of the opening, we were providing public art as a mitigation to that requirement. And to be clear, in addition to that, which we do not count as part of the square, we are providing an arcade. So therefore, in our calculation that is actually in the DR package, it's also bound into, within the exhibits contained here, is how we calculated and derived the full measure of the square, because it's not otherwise codified nor defined in the master plan. Quimby Festival Street. Festival Street is nowhere codified as to what it is. Basically, is a non-standard street. The applicant met with the Northwest Neighborhood Association to discuss the aspects of the project. At the time of the design of the street, it did not seem to be an issue to them, but now it seems they have changed their minds. We also met with PBOT, which directed us to make changes to the design of the Quimby as to what was approved. I also should note that the master plan also delineates where you cannot access the site, which are basically the other 2 street frontages. So Northwest 21st could not be accessed, and we could not access, based on the master plan, from the south. Lively public realm is another item that they pointed to. Uncertain about Northwest Neighborhood's viewing on this. However, the design of the building and square provide for infinite flexibility to occupy the public spaces and host many events. The proposed retail spaces are designed to spill out on the square and activate the edges. Urban character. Again, not sure how you would design a building to meet all the requirements of the master plan and not have a project with urban character. The building fronts all public edges. Create active and transparent occupied spaces. Is built of quality and permanent materials. Provides pedestrian scaling elements through the use of canopies, overhangs, as well as arcade. Incorporation of live-work residential units fronting on the future park. Also, the massing and the architecture of the building responds to its contemporaries, such as the LL Hawking, Slabtown Marketplace, Q21 across the street, Slabtown Block 294 approved and under construction, as well as Block 295, and any future neighbors envisioned in the master plan. Item 8, building exceeds height and setback limitations. Well, you heard a lot about that. Other than the granted modifications for the 47 feet on the low building, as well as actually an 18-inch difference between what is actually codified. It's not story height, by the way, for clarification's sake. I think that they said it was so many stories. That is not how it's specified in the master plan. It's actually by feet. And it says that anything over 75 feet would require setback, or it has to be no taller than 77 feet. We did solar studies, and we demonstrate that actually a building at 75 feet versus a building that's proposed is negligible on any kind of shading of the future park. Number 9, fails to provide required public spaces. Well, again, we are providing, and we are going to be required to, as a part of this project, going through permitting and review, a access easement of 45 feet on the west boundary, a 60-foot easement on the north boundary for the Green Street, for the Festival Street. So we comply. And the final item was just too much building, and I think we've hit on that far too many times. So I'd like, at this point, to turn over the microphone to Tom Brennicky.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mayor Wheeler. My name is Tom Brennicky. I am with Guardian Real Estate Services. I'm the president of the company, property owner, and the property developer. Well, we're finally here. 39 months ago, we began what has turned out to be an extraordinary effort to obtain permits for Block 290 in the Conway Master Plan area. As previously highlighted by our professionals, we've gone above and beyond in an effort to create a feasible project that meets the requirements of the master plan. Significant efforts were made to work with Northwest District Association members to achieve a design that would be approved by the city and economically viable. We've employed 2 different design teams on the project and worked through many iterations of building plans. As our neighborhood advocates have often acknowledged, our challenge has been to put 7 pounds of sand in a 5-pound bag. As previously articulated, we firmly believe that the master plan's objectives and goals have been met. City staff agrees, and design review commissioners unanimously approved the design. The City Parks Department is fully supportive of the design, and Portland Housing Bureau is also supportive. Unfortunately, we will probably never agree with our opponents on such a subjective matter as what constitutes a successful public square. We've gone to great lengths, though, and are very proud of our final design. While we can debate heights, FAR, square footage, and amendments, I ask that you not allow the most pressing concern here to be lost in the conversation. Call it what you want. Portland has a housing shortage. We have a significant shortage of affordable housing, nowhere near enough to meet current or future demand. We intend to build 200 apartments right at the future streetcar stop and still leave 65% of the site open to the public. You already approved our multi-affordable housing proposal, and now 40 units are designated for households at or below 80% area median income. For those households, rents will be discounted 37% to 56%, representing $400 to $1,500 each month in rent.
For how long would that be?
The initial period's 10 years.
Thank you.
I urge you today to uphold the Design Commission's unanimous decision and finally allow us to move these apartments from the drawing board to the leasing office. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a few questions.
Commissioner Fish.
Mr. Ramos, first of all, thank you for bringing the backup documents, and I'm sorry about our technology, but it's an equal opportunity technology snafu. It just seems like every PowerPoint, every time we meet, doesn't work. So, but that's after the last upgrade we did, so maybe that was our mistake. When I'm standing on Northwest Pettygrove Street and I'm looking north on the eastern edge of the property, and you have designed a kind of a promenade that looks like a pedestrian-friendly promenade going north, and then it abuts the park. That's land owned by whom?
It is owned privately. It's not part of a public right-of-way now.
And so, but that would be dedicated to public right-of-way?
Yes, it'll be subject to a public easement allowing access, as we've discussed.
And that would be in perpetuity?
Yes.
Okay, and so that I mean, just from my point of view, that's a very attractive buffer, but that gives pedestrian access north-south on that side of the building.
Yes,
correct?
It's designed to do that and designed to align with other north-south streets.
And can you state just succinctly for us again why inclusionary zoning does not apply to this project?
Yes, you have in a packet I've given to the clerk, which we can pass out now, a zoning opinion letter from the staff of the city, which makes the point that Ms. Adams made earlier, which is that within the area of the Conway Master Plan, the criteria that apply were vested in 2012. Since the city's requirements came in after that, they don't apply in this area.
So you're saying that this is a situation where a vesting occurred even before a developer submitted an application?
Well, the theory of the letter, and I think the legal status of it is that the plan vested the criteria. So the critical date is back in 2012.
And this, you've handed us a legal opinion from the Bureau of Development Services?
What you have is...
Your letter.
No, this is not my letter. This is over the head, the letterhead of the City of Portland Bureau of Development Services.
So they have affirmed that view, that the vesting occurred in 2012, notwithstanding the fact that no developer had submitted an application.
That's right.
And so, Mr. Ramos, how would you respond to the comment Mr. Michelson made? That from his perspective, you start by designing the plazas, the parks, and the streets, and you build the structures to complement the public realm. And in his view, as I understood it, this process has taken the reverse approach. I want to give you a chance to respond.
Yes, I think that's a mischaracterization of the process, and Greg, of course, knows the process better than me, and I think he should respond. But the instruction that was given by Mr. Brennicky to the design team was follow the master plan, meet those requirements. And if you can't then bring the process through the required filter of modifications and see if it passes muster. But the direction has been to start with the template created by the city in the plan, which has a park, which has the north-south access we're talking about, and has a square. Make that work.
I want to go back to IZ for a second. When was this project filed?
Just a second.
Was it
2014.
2014. So prior to the adoption of our inclusionary zoning ordinance. So you would argue,
Correct. Yes.
you would
Sorry.
argue that you're exempt for two grounds.
Correct.
One is that some entitlement may have occurred in 2012. Second, that that the filing occurred in 2014.
2016.
Pardon me? It's 2016?
It wasn't 2016. We've been 39 months at this, I'm sorry.
Prior
It's
to
been
the
a long time.
effective date. Prior to the effective date.
Prior to the effective date.
But you're correct, for two reasons.
And so the only risk that you have legally in this is if you had to file again, then there's a question about whether you're covered because it's a new application or whether you can still claim that the entitlement occurred in 2012.
Well, I think we would rely on the city's analysis to say that the rules that apply are the 2012 rules.
So, Mr. Ramos, the difference between this project being subject to inclusionary zoning or housing and the multi-project is the difference between, say, 90 years of affordability for some 20% of the units, either on the site or off the site, or 10 years of tax abatements for 20% of the units being affordable, 80% AMI or lower. Now, did I state that wrong, Dan?
No, I think you got it.
For 10 years.
So, but there's a huge delta here. If this was an inclusionary housing proposal, we get roughly 9 times the covenant in terms of affordability, and they're baked in. And the consideration may be a little different. Under the multi-plan, what the applicant gets is a tax abatement, correct?
Yes.
And that's to the whole building or just to the units?
It's the value of the units, isn't it?
It's to the residential portion.
Just the residential, for the entire building?
The residential
So
portion
all
of
the
building,
residential
correct.
units would be abated for 10 years in order to essentially get the public benefit of 20% of the units affordable to 80%
Correct.
AMI. I think we all acknowledge there's a huge ravine between those two outcomes. And in terms of public benefit. So if you're asking for changes to what the master plan would otherwise provide, does the council have the authority or the discretion to ask for an extension of the multi-program?
Well, the criteria are driven by what's in the code. You can always, of course, ask an applicant to go beyond the requirements of the code. So your question, do you have the ability to ask? Sure. And the applicant would have the ability to consider that. It's not something that can be imposed, in my view, but certainly it's a question that could be asked, and
Has
an
the
applicant could consider it.
has the applicant taken a position as to whether at the expiration of the initial 10-year period, she would be amenable to negotiating with the city a further extension?
I don't know that we've discussed that at this point.
Okay, thank you.
So how does this relate to any of the decision-making criteria before us?
I was going to ask
I
legal
appreciate the
counsel.
discussion.
Yeah,
I appreciate the discussion,
yeah.
but I'm just not sure it relates to our decision-making.
And that is my concern, that I'm very interested in the line of questioning of Commissioner Fish, but I want to make sure we're staying on track with the record.
Well, they've asked for modifications, Mayor, to the master plan. That's a
Correct.
discretionary act, and we have the right to impose discretionary conditions on anything beyond what the master plan would otherwise provide. And since the Design Commission has rendered a decision that some changes are warranted based on the view that it better meets overall design conditions, that's still a discretionary act. And my understanding is we have the right to set discretionary conditions on anything that alters the existing master plan.
The limitation on that law, which is you've generally stated, is that the condition has to relate directly to an approval criteria, and I think that's why.
Well, I'd like to hear from our legal counsel on that, as good as you are, Mr. Ramos.
Yes.
No, Mr. Ramos is correct, that the conditions of approval have to be geared towards the actual criteria. So one of the criteria here for a modification is, and I just closed the code, but it is, does it further a public benefit? Can you remind me exactly the language of the condition? For modification. Okay. So the purpose, so the modification can, let me pull out the code, because that will help me.
We should probably get this on the microphone so people at home can hear.
Yeah, and I want to have the code in front of me. Is it 8? (825-040). There, okay. So conditions of approval have to be geared towards making the applicant move closer to satisfying the criteria. As Mr. Ramos mentioned, the applicant can agree to conditions through negotiation that the city and the applicant decide are worthwhile, but the city can't necessarily impose them unless they're intended to further the criteria of approval. One of the criteria of approval here at issue with the modifications is whether it better meets design guidelines, and the resulting development will better meet the applicable design guidelines. And the other criteria is the purpose of the standard. On balance, the proposal will be consistent with the purpose of the standard for which the modification is requested. And there is a lot of discretion in those criteria, yes.
So strictly speaking, I mean, we've done dozens of these hearings, Mayor. The council can always say that we disagree with the Design Commission on any modification, or can say we are agreeable to certain modifications provided there is a parallel negotiation about other public benefits that we've identified as being compelling. We've done that repeatedly. Mr. Ramos's job is to make sure we stay in our lane.
Very good.
Is that a fair comment?
I would agree with that.
Good. That's very helpful, and I appreciate that clarification. Thanks, Commissioner. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yes, please, Commissioner Daly.
Thank you. All right, bear with me. I have a few questions. I'm about to prove I had no ex parte contact because I have so many questions about this project. I just need a clear number on how much public space we're giving up. 3,000 square feet for the encroachment on the park. Anything on the plaza? I don't know if you actually gave the final number.
The plaza is
Yeah.
16,008, I believe, is in the exhibit that you have. And that was established through discussions with Design Commission as to how the measurement would be accomplished.
And that was roughly the required area?
That's the standard.
That
Okay.
it meets the standard.
And the Festival Street, I love that name. Is that something that's planned or actually happening already? Are they using that street? I haven't been to that area
well,
for a while.
Currently, there is no street.
Okay.
It's a parking lot currently.
Right.
I think it's a driveway.
Okay.
It's more aptly, I think, termed as the alignment, the street alignment.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, absolutely, the design is shown to show flexibility, and also some of the other guidelines in the master plan was to not to impact pedestrian connectivity, meaning, there's safe harbor along the edges of the Festival Street for pedestrians and bikes, which we provided for. One of the things that, again, we looked to as we went to PBOT for some direction on Festival Street, and unfortunately, there is none. And so what we determined in going through this, and this has happened on other projects, is that basically the term I use is anything that's not built to a city street standard could be considered a festival street, meaning we call zero curbs, no conventional curbs, enhanced landscaping, larger buffers, interesting paving patterns. All those things could be considered part of a festival street. And we're not discounting the fact that that street could be occupied for a neighborhood event, although, it would impact the residents, but that's something that could be managed very easily. And right now, the only vehicular access on the Festival Street would just be for access for the residents.
Okay. So just to be clear, the modifications would be the encroachment on the park, the not requiring a setback for that top floor, and allowing the penthouse amenity. Are those the three main?
I think that's a question better posed to Hillary to make sure that we're defined on that. But those are some of the modifications that we requested and were granted. I'd also like to mention, so the technicality of the 47 feet is that we're allowed under Title 33 to have encroachment over 47 feet, which we always had in the building. And actually, we made sure that when we did do the 10-foot additional story height, we set that back. We moved that back to the west so that the idea is that we would not cast any more shadow from that club room than you would have from the parapet at 47 feet.
Okay. Can you, and I understand if you can't, but would you be able to give us an estimate of how many units you'd have to reduce the development by if you didn't get that 3,000 foot, the encroachment on the public park? Would you have to?
Yeah, we did run the numbers on a couple of different metrics on that. And again, I want to clarify something. When we came in with the prior design, we actually had stoops where we have live-work units. Mm-hmm. And at that point in time, we actually had 10-foot stoops extending out, which I hear the word encroachment, and encroachment usually conveys that it's going into a public right-of-way. And I like using the word encroachment here because it's really not. But what we did was we actually removed 10 feet, and then we pushed the building over slightly. And actually, the net reduction over the prior design is actually 5 feet. I want everybody to hang on to that number. It's 5 feet because we actually had something that actually pushed out into that realm before. 41 units, to answer your other question. If we were to cleave off the edge of the building, we would lose 41 units.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about why retail was reduced?
It was not reduced.
It wasn't, okay.
I don't know where that comes from, but, and it's interesting. Again, I wish staff could talk more about this, but there's so many guidelines and so many standards that are buried and contained within the master plan, and in some cases, the guidelines and the standards are actually in conflict with one another. And so, interestingly enough, it doesn't really codify exactly how much retail in square footage is required. What it does say is you have to have 50 feet of depth, and that the square has to have 70% active use. And And interestingly enough, in the master plan, it does not address resident lobbies as meeting that standard. However, in a lot of the other urban jobs or projects that we do, that is considered active use. And actually, we were conditioned by Design Commission, and rightfully so, to put a door, an entry, off the plaza, as well as an entry off of the street to activate, so the comings and goings of those residents who will be part of the neighborhood can come and go and meet and greet and be seen in the plaza.
Sure. And where will the public art be? You mentioned you're adding public art.
I'm gonna use my little exhibit here.
Yeah.
The connection here, there's a wall here along this unit.
Got it.
And we're proposing a mural. And actually, what we're proposing in the approved design was folk art that actually is a part of the existing service facility that's on the site that'll be raised.
So I would just like to comment that I do think this public square versus courtyard conversation is really important. I've actually been to the John Lennon Plaza in Barcelona. I've been saying that Amsterdam ruined me for cycling in Portland, and Barcelona kind of ruined me for public spaces in Portland because they're amazing. And, you know, it does sound like you are, by and large, following the letter of the law, but we want to make sure that the spirit is also there and that the space doesn't feel like that walking down the street, I wouldn't feel like an uninvited guest because I don't live or work in one of these spaces. So I think those concerns are legitimate, and I would just encourage you to consider thinking about how to make it truly welcoming. Obviously, the retail businesses are going to draw people in. Yeah.
You know, Commissioner.
Well, and I would like to point out somewhere, building closer to my neighborhood is called One North, and they had somewhat similar requirement, although I don't think that they were charged with creating a square, but there was an alley previously, you know, running through the lot, so they're required to give public access. Well, that space, if you want to drive by, does not feel welcoming to the neighborhood. I drove to work by this space for 3 years, and I don't think I ever saw anyone hanging out there. So if you want an example of, you know, maybe what not to do, you could look at that. No offense to anybody that might have had anything to do with that, but it just, for whatever reason, is not inviting the community in. Sorry.
I was going to say that that issue was a central theme of the conversation before the Design Commission, and the team was sent back a couple of times to try to improve on just that question. And it might be available to you today to hear from someone from the Design Commission on that question, but that's been a critical issue of design from the start, and how to make this a square rather than just a courtyard. And that's been our goal. Of course, it's your judgment as to how successful we've been, but I think the Design Commission in the end felt that the right moves have been made to create that situation.
Thank you.
Commissioner Fritz? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to follow on with Commissioner Daly's excellent line of questioning. You said that having the parking ramp off of the festival street might create some conflicts. It surely would create conflicts that if that's the only way that the residents can get their vehicles in and out. You couldn't have the whole thing being a festival, could you?
I'm sorry, is there a question?
The question is,
Okay, the question is,
how would you envision that happening? If there's some kind of a street fair, but all these people need to get their cars in and out.
Well, once again, so that's for resident parking. I would envision that the management could basically inform the residents and on a lot of streets that get closed, that the street was going to be closed for a certain time for a festival to occur, and to plan accordingly.
And how many units of housing are you proposing here?
We have 200 units of housing, but we're at a 0.5 parking ratio. So not all of these residents actually park in the parking structure.
So where will they park?
Well, we're hoping they'll take the public transportation that's going to be available to them.
Why did you put the parking ramp off of the Festival Street rather than off of 21st or Pettygrove?
They're restricted streets under the master plan.
Peabody.
And Northwest 21st is designated as a light rail street, so there's be no opportunity. And then additionally, there's been debate going back and forth about having a driveway crossing on Pettygrove. If we did have a driveway crossing on Pettygrove, then we would be hard pressed to meet the other guideline requirements of the active retail.
Okay. What's this number 44,014?
That's the entire blue area.
Okay, and how big is the square?
The square is 16,008 square feet, not including the breezeway or the arcade.
Okay. And when I'm thinking back to some of the great places in Europe, I'm thinking of St. Mark's Piazza in Venice, where at each corner there are accesses to get in, because it's not going to be obvious from 21st, which is one of the busy streets, that you look into here and there's not much to see, and then you're going to have to jog around to be even able to see the park.
While there is no direct public access, at one time we did, I think the staff even said in one of our previous designs, we actually had a connection directly to Northwest 21st in the inside, what I call the inside knuckle of the building. However, Design Commission did not feel that that was the right answer, and the idea was to push the building back and open it to the corner would be a better design solution. The other aspect of that is when we start to bifurcate the floor plan, we start to impact some of the other guidelines of the master plan, ironically, so that when you start to try to meet all of the percentages of the active uses fronting on the square, it becomes very difficult to meet all the metrics of that.
So how long is this, the private space here, which is for the residents to get out onto the square, how long is that distance?
The resident portion, or just the entire length?
The resident portion.
The resident portion, it's probably about 65 feet of that length.
And that will be private, there won't be a right-of-way through to the other side?
That'll be for the residents, that is correct.
The 70 feet's quite a long way when you've got that amount. I'm just actually curious on some of the details here. Why have you specified it's going to be bike repair and a pet wash? How did that come up as the most urgent need in this neighborhood?
That's actually one of the amenities that's outlined in the master plan. What's really interesting about the master plan when they talk about the libraries and other public spaces is that there's also a provision in there, if I remember the master plan correctly, it actually gets you bonus FAR. And we did not choose to use bonus FAR. And we knew that we were trying to put retail in that back corner. That'd be very difficult for us to make an active retail space. We know we need an amenity for the residents, and we decided to make that amenity for the residents as well as the public.
So there's, presumably on this retail then, there's entrances both sides. So there's entrance off of Quimby and there's an entrance off of the plaza.
That is correct.
Okay. How do those businesses get their stuff in and out?
Through the front door. Off
of
more
the
than
Festival
likely
Street.
off of Quimby, front door loading.
So that would also be happening on the Festival Street in the event of
Or it could occur off Northwest 21st because there's on-street parking and loading there as well.
Well, except for this one here. What's the retail, it says retail trash here. How is the garbage collected from that then? Or why is the trash there?
Well, at one point you do run out of space on plans for certain things like services. We tried to take and put it in a place where the retailers could actually get to. The idea is that the trash collection would be at the street. So basically those are contained in bins. And so the bins would be rolled out at the time the trash pickup.
To where? Which?
To the street, to the right of way.
Which one?
Well, more than likely Pettygrove.
So everybody's going to be bringing their trash out there for the...
Yes, just like most of the downtown buildings are rolled out to the curb.
Yeah, it's a bit squished in here. Commissioner Saltzman has some questions.
Commissioner Saltzman,
Yeah.
and then Commissioner Fish had a question from Parks, and then I'd like us to keep moving the hearing. We'll have plenty of opportunities to ask questions at the end. Thank you.
So
Commissioner
I'm going to approach this on a much more global level. This project's been at it for 40 months, around 39 and a half, 40 months, so that's over 3 years, if I'm doing the math right.
It's over 3 years.
Okay, so there was, I think, Tim, you mentioned there was a 3-person committee from the neighborhood who engaged in a 3-hour meeting with you, the development team, I presume,
Yes.
and reached an agreement of sorts? Is that right?
Yes, the commission essentially at one point said, to get this right, let's appoint a subcommittee.
Subcommittee.
And let's have that subcommittee of our commission meet with representatives of the developer and the neighborhood and see what could be done. And in that committee meeting, different design options were considered. I can say on behalf of the development team that we thought when we left the meeting we had a conceptual agreement with the neighborhood. We've been disabused of that idea since then. But that process took place and a lot of trade-offs were considered. And the key, the configuration you see here is the product of that conversation.
So there was never a sign-off per se by the neighborhood
No, and
representatives?
I wouldn't want to represent
Okay.
that they always had to go back to their board, of course.
All right, okay. And then, this is private land, right? This is
Yes.
owned privately. So I guess, and I realize I'll ask this of the opponents too, but is it fair to hold up a John Lennon Square or a Pioneer Square or something like that, which arose out of public ownership and was developed under public ownership expectations of this is what a square should look like? Is it fair to take that same expectations and impose it upon privately owned property? This is purely an opinion,
Right. Yes,
so I realize
I mean, the difference here is the way we're funding this square is as a part of a development project. So we have to be able to do the math and have a pro forma that shows that the development project can be successful enough to actually carry the weight of the additional investment in creating a public space. That's the challenge here. It's different than probably whatever happened in a medieval era in Barcelona.
Okay, thank you.
First, I just want to go on record as saying, having spent time in my wife's family beloved country of Spain, I actually think our parks stand up quite well. And I think the suite of parks we have in the River District are the envy of any city our size in this country or in Europe. But that's just one person's discretionary view. What's the status of the park to the east? When will that be built out?
Subsequent to our development being completed. They'll begin planning when we start construction.
And that will be pursuant to a robust public process for designing a public space?
That's what I understand, yes.
Okay.
I don't believe we have a development agreement for it yet, right?
Correct,
All
right.
right, but that's an ongoing negotiation.
Parks has
with
been
Parks
involved
Bureau.
the whole time here.
But there will be a park in short order once the development is
Yes.
up and running. One of you gentlemen said that you're planning to have some folk art in the passageway between the building. I don't know what the rules are, but because I'm the council liaison to the Regional Arts and Culture Council, may I at least just suggest that if we're going to be doing public art in this area, and there will be public art obviously in the park because of our rules, how wonderful would it be to think about some connectedness with the public art so that it's not just some folk art here and something else there? And I would urge you to consider engaging the broader public in a narrative that links the two spaces. And Regional Arts and Culture Council does public art for the city. It would just be a shame if we're going to have an iconic plaza and a new park that the art was not speaking to each other, or wasn't, at least someone wasn't actually thinking about the two. And so I would urge you to consider that. When I look at I'm still coming back to the space to the east of the building, which, is there any reason why that could not be the future home of a festival if it was the intent to have some kind of outdoor event. It abuts a park. It's on a side of a building. It has pedestrian access. To me, it actually, with all due respect, looks more attractive than a street. Could that be festival? Could there be festival programming on that public space so that we're actually connecting it to something, i.e. the park?
There's no good reason not to do that.
Okay, other than the private developer could say no, but I mean, it seems to me, I agree with my colleagues. If we're going to have if the parking is the primary purpose of what used to be called the Festival Way, I think we should be thinking about an alternative, and this seems to me to actually be a much more successful public realm for festival, if we're talking about setting up a family-friendly event and welcoming people, because it abuts the building and the park. So, Mr. Ramos, is that a solution?
It makes perfect sense, and it would not, there would be no interference with the driveway access on Quimby to do that, and it has, the great advantage of allowing people to spill into the park as a part of the festival, or if it begins to rain, to move the other way towards the square where there is some rain protection.
Well, for example, in the Fields Park, which was the last park that I had the honor of working on, we've created a festival way, if you will, a festival loop around the permeable surface. It's not my favorite configuration for certain events where alcohol is served, but it does bring people into the park and also provides an amenity. So I think we may have a solution, or at least a concept.
Yeah, it's reasonable. Yep.
What's the width of that easement there versus the easement on Quimby?
It's 45 feet,
So that's 45, and what's Quimby?
60 feet.
And that's where we get into the encroachment into the park space, right?
Correct. I believe PBOT has the conditions of approval spelled out in the staff report that we were to basically provide the easement full 45 feet and the full 60 feet on Quimby.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Opponents of the appeal, 3 minutes each. Carla, how many folks do we have signed up?
4 people. have
Four,
signed up.
very good. And if anybody else wants to sign up, Carla's the person to see.
The first 3 are Julie Livingston, Homer Williams, and Sarah Bobian.
Come on up. Name for the record, 3 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and Mayor Wheeler. My name is Julie Livingston, and I am Chair of the Portland Design Commission. I have some very brief testimony this afternoon. So the Conway Master Plan document describes a phased development. Section 7 of the Conway Master Plan describes a phased development. Phase 1 is the grocery store, LL Hawkins, and the city park. Phase 2 is Block 290W, the block we're talking about today, and the remaining 2 blocks to the north that then constitute a super block that is the park, this development, and the 2 blocks to the north. So many of the issues that are relevant to this appeal layer into the assumptions around phasing of this super block. The site of the building sites, the size of the building sites, the access to below-grade parking, the development of the new city park, and as we now know, the phasing is not happening as the master plan projected that it would. Viewed through the lens of the master plan, there is some inherent compromise in the building being discussed today because the park is not yet complete and the 2 blocks to the north aren't part of this developer's current proposal. So Conway is under no obligation to sell parcels in the order described in the master plan, nor is the developer of Block 290 obligated to purchase and develop the remaining parcels on the superblock. The master plan actually contains language that recognizes the difficulty of achieving a perfect rollout of the idealized vision. I'm quoting now from the master plan. Market needs, economics, and developer capacity will clearly influence the pace and viability of every parcel. As such, Conway cannot make any specific commitments at this time for the eventual placement, program, or timing of any of the individual parcels within the master plan boundary. So as you know, the Portland Design Commission assesses all buildings subject to a Type 3 review for compliance with the relevant design guidelines. And no building fulfills the intent of all guidelines perfectly. But it was the view of the commission with a 5-0 vote that this building was compliant with the guidelines that applied. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Sarah Bobie, and I'm the Senior Director of Stewardship and Farm Engagement at the Tillamook County Creamery Association. As you may know, we are a 109-year-old cooperative in Tillamook, Oregon. You might be wondering why I'm here. Well,
Can we start guessing, and the one who gets the closest gets a lifetime of cheese or
Yeah,
something?
I was assuming it was to bring free samples of ice cream. That's
Surprise! While our headquarters is still in Tillamook, we have a growing presence in Portland. We just moved our Portland outpost from Tigard to the Slabtown neighborhood 4 weeks ago. We are currently leasing parking spots for our employees in Block 290. And while with the development, we'll be extremely challenged by the lack of parking in the neighborhood, we also realize it's critical to Oregon's future to solve the housing crisis in Portland and beyond. While I'm not an expert on squares or the master plan, we support buildings that are part of the solution to the housing shortage. With a range of rents, including the inclusionary housing for families earning 80% of the Portland median family income, the development provides options to Portlanders looking for stable housing, potentially including some of our employees. I don't want to be short-sighted, but it seems that the longer this process drags on, the longer it takes to provide this housing. As part of our Enriched Communities commitment, our objective is to provide social innovation and investment toward community resilience. The complexities of housing, planning, real estate, economics, and development are such that they eliminate a one-solution approach. It goes without saying, the central dilemma of our affordable housing challenge is that housing costs more than local wages and have the power to buy or rent. It is a wage problem at one end. In the case of Oregon markets, a problem of strong demand for external equity and wealth on the other. Inevitably, it boils down to math. For us, affordable housing for our hourly workforce is our biggest concern. We frequently have more than 20 positions that we cannot fill because of lack of rentals. But stable housing for all Oregonians will lead to community resilience and a strong foundation for our business. We support the development for its voluntary focus on inclusionary housing, the public square for engaging the community, and the on-street shops to provide nearby services. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Homer Williams, Portland, Oregon. Mayor, Commissioners, Commissioner Nick, it warms my heart to see you here.
Thank you.
And
I feel grateful for every day.
Yeah, you betcha. It's a little bit hard when you compare a park, the type of parks we're able to do in the Pearl or South Waterfront, where either the developer and city had significant parcels of land. And so as part of a larger planning process, whereas here, where individual buildings are being asked to do something, it does make designing buildings problematic. And I think that they've really done a very good job. If she can pull it up, I'd like to show you a similar plaza that we did with the Residence Inn.
It hasn't come through, so it might have
Oh,
been
is that right?
It might have been too big, I think. I can.
Let me see here, yeah. Maybe you could just pass it around.
A number of us, I think, have had, a number of us have
Phone might
had,
disappear.
If anybody has any long-distance calls they'd like to make, now's your chance.
actually, I think a number of us have already had ex parte contact with this plaza.
And so what you have there, and frankly, we were very, very nervous in the beginning, and even had plans to where we could gate it. And but it's turned out to be a great addition for the hotel. It gives them an opportunity to mix with people from the neighborhood. We've had weddings there, I mean, all kinds of events, not just from guests. And so I think that these can work really well, frankly. And in the early years, we would never have considered doing that in any of our buildings. Riverstone, any of them. I mean, we were so fearful of what might happen. But what we found over time was that these do work and they are safe. Now, you will have some issues like we're having right now because of the homeless situation, but generally it can be managed. And but I do think that it certainly opens up the neighborhood. And I think the idea of opening up to the park, participating in the kind of events that would take place, I think it's very engaging. So the only other comment I'd have is that if anything I've learned in the last couple of years is any nook and cranny, anywhere we can find affordable housing, we need to get it. And we need to get as much of it as we can. So that's all.
Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. Thank you.
And the last person who signed up is Garrison Creamer.
Hello again.
Greetings.
Good afternoon. Garrison Creamer. I'm an infrastructural consultant. I took a look at this building, and I want to start off by saying I do agree that the 7-story limit is good. I think southern exposure is good as well. The no entrances, I believe it was on the north side, or basically there's 2 sides, I believe, that don't have entrances. Oh man, that is very despotic, and that will be sure to bring depression to the area. I mean, architecture and vision. I'm a little disappointed. I mean, I came to Portland because I believe it's, supposedly the greenest city in America. And, the leading example of bicycles or bicyclism or whatever you want to call it in the nation. But from what I've seen, this town still ran on oil. If you go to the east side and you look back on the bank, you can clearly see that this town is moving towards more of a New York metropolitan model, although there are codes supposedly that keep it from doing that. There's a difference between an open space and a negative space. Not all open spaces are negative spaces, but all negative spaces are open space. When I look at the design of this square and all this 90-degree rigid flat, it's very cold. And to me, this square that they're developing is an example of a negative space. Now, Mayor, I know you said that you have no financial gain from this vote, but I disagree with that because every time you take an action, it's a risk, which there's an opportunity cost involved. And, anytime you vote on something, that could affect your future as a politician. So if you're planning on running for governor, this vote could, have some type of financial gain. 30 seconds. Basically, before I got here, I watched a video on infrastructure and with the futures, and the question they asked is how ready is the infrastructure to accommodate the next level of mobility? Basically, what makes the city mobility, communication, and energy. And the main issues you guys are going to have are designing privacy and security in the future. And one quote was, some of the more aggressive mayors are looking at how do I retrofit our current infrastructure? And I think, and I agree with them, that maybe it's more like how can you be part of the change and make maybe more a shift towards experimentation. But I'm going to say I completely disagree with this. This architecture is despotic. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We now have rebuttal by the appellant. 5 minutes.
I'd like to figure out how to bring up my...
Your mic may be off.
No, it looks like it's on.
Oh,
I'm just too
okay.
far away.
No, oh, I see Carla has to activate it. Very good.
And I'm only
Hi.
here because Karen may have some questions or want to refer to my expertise as the NWDA president when this all was negotiated. Otherwise, I will not
Very good.
separate myself.
I'm trying to find my PowerPoint. There's a few things on the end of it that I'd like to point out, but I don't know where it is. Ah, okay. That's it. Thank you. Yeah. I just want to slip to a couple of things. I want to talk about something that's really basic to the master plan that I don't think has been brought up, and I think there's some misunderstandings. There's a fundamental part of the master plan that says that the entire site has a 3-to-1 FAR, but that FAR must be placed on these blocks. And if you can see in the lower left, we created the 200 by 200 foot block pattern. So what happens is you can transfer off of this public open space, the FAR, onto development. That was the big trade, so that we could get our public open space and they could get greater development. I just like to touch upon what that sort of means, the way the master plan looks at it. Every building has a footprint and a height. That creates a building envelope. And so in this particular case, this block has a building envelope of, as you've heard, 77 feet and 47 feet. In this one, you have another obligation, and that's the 16,000 square feet of public square. So where now you have a smaller volume, and this smaller volume is about 120,000 square feet. The master plan itself in the appendix assumed there'd be about 85,000 square feet of development on this site. The proposal is for 182,000. So there's a different understanding of building volume versus the FAR that I think is really a challenge to try to express. But I think what this means is that in order for the early development came in with not enough square, so the solution was not to decrease the amount of development, but to push it into the park. That's sort of where we believe this problem started. And I think we also need to be reminded that the approval criteria is to better meet these things and not better meet the prior proposal where the square was too small, but better meet the master plan. I want to also mention a couple of other things. I think this master plan is there since 2012, and the intent is that this block is about the square and the development supports that square. It's in the master plan. It was there when the developer purchased the property. We think it's an opportunity to create an amazing development that is there with a square and there with a park. And what the developer looked at was an obstacle. Gosh, we have to provide these public open spaces. Gosh, I have to have more in order to do that. And that's why it's taller, it's into the park, the square is smaller, etc. So I think that's sort of where one of the fundamental disagreements is between the developer and the neighborhood. So there's a couple of things that have come up about sort of movements and changes to the park. And I think or to the master plan. And I think it's important to think about what a master plan is and the efforts that were put into it, and whether or not a master plan can be supported by this city. If we're making all of these changes to it, why are we having a master plan at all? So I'm going to ask Ron again to talk a little bit more about the process by which, and all of the work and all of the years. The developer talks about the years that he's put into this development. There were a lot of years put into developing the master plan.
Thank you. Following up on both what Karen was saying and Commissioner Salzman asked about, the master plan predates the applicant's ownership. So they knew what they were getting into when they bought it. They knew what the limitations were. That has not changed. So the aspirations were what was developed by the community, hundreds of people in this community, not in Barcelona. So while we can aspire to Barcelona, I think the community was aspiring to simply have what's in the master plan, and that was considered the reasonable compromise by at least 3 members in this group. Another complicating factor that hasn't really come up is that it was the developer or the applicant decided to choose to develop this parcel as a standalone parcel.
Just so you know, I'm going to let you continue and we'll count the time, and then I will let the principal opponent, if they'd like to add to their time as well.
Great, I'll keep it
So
short. Thank you.
have the opportunity
I
to
appreciate that.
finish. Sure.
So the fact that they decided to develop it as a standalone parcel has created immense problems. The master plan did not envision that. One of the opponents said that there's a phasing plan, and there is. Things like the entrance on to the parking garage on Quimby Festival Street wouldn't happen if the phasing in the master plan were followed, because it would block 290 and 291 would be developed together, and the parking garage entrance would be on Raleigh. So some of the problems have been caused by the fact that Conway decided to sell this property as a standalone parcel, and the applicant and developer are developing it as a standalone parcel. I'll just reiterate what Karen has said. This looks nothing like what was envisioned by the developers of the master plan and the community that was predating it. It has nothing to do with Barcelona, though I think some of those examples are fantastic inspiration.
Very good. Thank you. Principal opponent, if you want an extra minute and 15 seconds after Commissioner, if there's questions, Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you. Yeah, so
You can think
the
on
minute 15 is extra, but I have a question about the FAR,
Yes.
floor area ratio. Is that relying on transfer from the adjacent park?
It is relying on transfer from the Quimby Festival Street to the north, or part of the Quimby Festival Street to the north, and the west 60 feet of the park. That additional FAR is transferred onto the development footprint. That's where the 182,000 came from. I think they actually had 200,000, but.
Well, so obviously that's a very wonky thing, and I
It is
appreciate
wonky.
I appreciate your knowledge of it, because I'm not as familiar with it. You are stating that it's too much, and the applicant says it's not. Could you just explain the different points of view?
So, again, there's a building envelopes defined in the master plan. So you have a building envelope on this block that's, like a quart bottle. And you can transfer FAR anywhere. So the FAR that he's transferred to this site can be transferred anywhere in the district. And if you look at the master plan heights limits, you'll see that there are blocks that are all the way to 150 feet in height. So the intent has always been that the FAR would transfer off of the open space and onto blocks that can handle it and are actually meant to handle it, and not this block. So I think the challenge has been since the beginning is to try to put 2 quarts of water into a 1-quart container.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And does the applicant now own the entire site, or have they just purchased this property?
Well, I think you'd have to ask them. My understanding was they had purchased the southern, that all of Block 290, including the park itself. So
Yeah.
the development site, the 200 by 200 development site, and the 200 by 260. And maybe Quimby, you'll have to ask them.
I will ask. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Very good.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Principal opponent 115 if you want it.
Mr. Mayor, probably the most useful thing would be to answer questions that you may have, and I think one was about the ownership of the site. Go ahead, Tom.
So we own the entire parcel, so both the park parcel and then the building footprint parcel.
But not anywhere else. So from your perspective, you either put the FAR onto this project or you have to you could sell it though, right? You could transfer the development rights to the next adjacent property?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
So we just had explained to us by the Neighbourhood Association that it was envisioned that there wouldn't be quite such an intense building around the plaza, and that the transferable development rights were envisioned to go somewhere else in the district. If you only own 290 and the adjacent park, then you're not going to be saving any transfer of development rights to sell to somebody else?
No. We're utilizing all of the available FAR on our site.
Yes, that's where we get into. But you could keep them and then sell them elsewhere, couldn't you? Even though you don't own, maybe I could check with the staff on this, but I think even though you don't.
Right. We have an agreement with our seller, who's XPO, formerly Conway, where we cannot sell any incremental or extra FAR. That needs to go back to XPO.
And they own the rest of the site still?
They own, we have to give them back. We cannot sell any surplus FAR. We cannot benefit from that. So we're utilizing the FAR that we're allowed on our site.
Right, I think that's where
And
we're
cannot
getting.
benefit from additional FAR.
That's where we're getting into some problems, because the master plan was done looking at the whole area, and now, as was mentioned, we're doing it out of phase and just looking at these two parcels, which is challenging.
Yes, the theory, if I understand their theory of calculating FAR, we would have to reduce the available FAR by the FAR that would be associated with the square and perhaps by the north-south pedestrian access way. But that's not required anywhere. There's no mandatory transfer of FAR off the site.
No, I understand that. Thank you.
I have just a comment. Having been charged with building out a number of master plans, I have been humbled by things called market timing, access to capital, private sector decision-making. The best of intentions, we're still going to build things out in a way that is flexible and is market-driven. And the best example of that on the negative end is how few cranes we had in the air during the recession, how difficult it was to do affordable housing. But, Mr. Ramos, I'm inclined to offer a condition of approval unless you just accept it as a friendly amendment, that the applicant will consult with RAC in the development of the public art, both at the private development and at the park.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea, and I think we would agree to such a condition.
Okay, thank you.
Are they not required to do so anyway?
Well, as I understand it, there's a question mark about on the plaza whether they have to engage RAC. They do have to use RAC on the park. My suggestion is that we do them holistically so that we're not disconnected, and the applicant has agreed to that.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. Council discussions, legal counsel, if you could restate the three options before us, please.
So first, you have to decide whether or not you're going to close the record or leave the record open and continue the hearing or close the hearing completely.
Very good. So we have three options there. We can close the evidentiary hearing. We can keep it open.
Mayor, I move to close the record.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fish. Second. We have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor, vote aye. Or excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm not at the county anymore. Carla, please call the roll.
Udaly?
Aye.
Fritz?
Aye.
Fish?
I'm voting aye because I think it was a comprehensive and very thoughtful hearing with a full record. Aye.
Saltzman?
Aye.
Wheeler?
Aye. The evidentiary, the record is now closed. This means that the council will accept no more oral or written testimony on the land use appeal.
Okay.
I would,
Hillary, would you like to present to them their options? Yeah.
We have the cheat sheet.
Okay, yeah, that's all I was going to say.
It sounds like
is I-
Commissioner Saltzman's ready to make a motion, so why don't we go ahead and let him do that?
Just
well, I
refer to
would,
your cheat sheet.
with the condition just offered by Commissioner Fish, I would move to deny the appeal and uphold the Design Commission's decision to approve
I'll
with
second that.
conditions.
So we have a motion to deny the appeal from Commissioner Saltzman and to uphold the Design Review Commission with the added condition as stated by Commissioner Fish with regard to public art. Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Fish seconds. Discussion?
Just as a reminder, today would be a tentative vote, and then you come back to adopt the final vote when staff has had the opportunity to prepare the findings.
Very good.
So I'd like to just discuss the issue for me. I mean, we were told that we need this housing, therefore the public benefit outweighs the public damage. But the affordable housing is paid for by the tax abatement, and it's on the whole building, and it's not all that affordable anyway, at 80%. So we've already got way too many luxury apartments or condos as it is. So I don't think that's the crux of the issue. I think the issue is, does it conform to the master plan? And does it provide the kind of vibrant open spaces or public open spaces that was envisioned? As the neighborhood said, they spent a long time doing that master plan. So this being the first project out of the gate to be a major disappointment, I think gives me pause about whether we should ask for some more appropriate development.
Well, just on the discussion point of view, I would agree with you, Commissioner Fritz. There is a benefit to the developer by doing the affordable housing. I still think that, we need housing, period. Whether it's affordable of any kind, we need housing in this city. So there is affordability there. But I guess what sways me is that, with all due respect to the people who labored long and hard over the master plan, it takes someone to step forward and give life to that master plan. And this is the proposal before us. This is the proposal that has been before the Design Commission for over 3 years now. And with your input every step of the way, and it seems to be a consensus proposal. I know that the opponents don't like every aspect of it, but it seems to me there has to be a marriage here of what the master plan calls for and what the private sector is stepping up to give life to. And it seems to me the marriage is a pretty good fit, and I look to the Design Commission as the ultimate person or entity that I'm taking my cues from on this one. So that's why I'm supporting the Design Commission. I think they labored long and hard over all these issues that we're hearing today, and this is where they came down, and I'm going to back it on this one.
Any further discussions?
Yeah.
Commissioner Fish.
So for me, this is a close call, Mayor, and I appreciate the comments of both of my colleagues. And frankly, early on in the hearing, I was probably leaning a little bit the other way. But here's why I'm prepared to support Commissioner Saltzman's motion. This process has gone on for 39 months. And even by the expansive standards of some of the other matters that have come before us, 39 months is a goodly long period of time with a lot of eyes. And over that time, I actually think the product has gotten better. In fact, while it's not necessarily germane to our decision, I actually think this building is quite attractive. Second, we have a 16,000 square foot plaza. I was on the council when we adopted the master plan. I believe I was the Parks Commissioner at the time. And I take a second seat to no one in this council in wanting to have vibrant and humane scaled and successful public spaces. I don't feel as negative about this space. I think the challenge is going to be how it's programmed. And so I think the developer is taking on a significant responsibility to program it in a way that makes it attractive. And I got a little nervous when I saw the guy with the electric guitar in the middle of the plaza, because I live in a building where the owner, I live in a rental building where the owner had the bright idea of putting this big deck just below my window, and people play loud music at night. And maybe I'm just getting older, but I would prefer they not. On the question of a master plan, I think we're at risk here of investing almost a scientific precision to a master plan rather than an organic and evolutionary concept. A master plan is a statement of aspiration. But everything that follows is based on the ability of capital to be brought in, a developer to take a chance, design process, interaction with the community, and by definition, it's going to evolve and change. And it doesn't actually have to meet my own personal aesthetic standards, although I prefer that the final project be something that I could imagine sometime living in, although I probably could not afford this building, but I mean, I still would like it to be a place that I could live in, and I think this is an attractive building. I don't think the multi-program on this building is such a compelling public benefit. The fact that we have a program that gives a 10-year tax abatement on all the residential units in exchange for 20% that are 80% of AMI is better than nothing, and I appreciate the developer doing it. I'm not being dismissive. It is a program we offer, but it does not address the current crisis on our streets, and therefore I think we are erring on the side of investing public resources in a kind of housing that does not currently meet the crisis. It's nice to have, but it is not what is the essential missing piece, in my view. Finally, it means a lot to me that the Design Commission spent all the time they did and got to a 5-0 vote. And I'm just going to say that if we are going to have high-level advisory bodies with expertise helping us make these decisions, I think we have to pay attention to how they vote and how they interact with the application. Or else we should relieve them of all the thankless work we ask them to do, and we should just become the Design Commission, which I actually think would be a terrible mistake, not because I have any doubts about the aesthetic judgment of my clients, but we don't have the time to be the Design Commission. So we've asked a bunch of enlightened citizen volunteers to do the work for us and make recommendations. And we have had split votes before, we've had vigorous disagreements, but I think a 5-0 vote after all the effort put in is noteworthy. And so when I look at the time this project has been in the pipeline, when I look at the high quality of the design, when I look at the fact that there is 16,000 square feet of plaza which needs to be activated to be successful, when I add the modest but important public benefit of some affordability, when I think about the fact that a master plan is nothing without some further discussions which require flexibility and compromise and engagement, and when I consider a 5-0 vote, I respectfully have to conclude that this now is ready to move forward. And while I appreciate the concerns raised by the neighborhood, and I listened very, very carefully to them, and they were thoughtful, on this particular motion, I will vote with Commissioner Saltzman.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Udaley?
Well, thank you to Hillary once again for a clear, concise presentation. Thank you also to Julie for your service on the Design Review Committee and to the Design Review Committee. These hearings are always fascinating to consider, and they're always challenging to decide on because both sides bring legitimate concerns to the issue. I'm excited about the park, I'm excited about the plaza, I'm happy we'll get some affordable housing. I agree with Commissioner Fritz and Fish, though, that we really do have a glut of market and luxury rate units, and, you know, by and large, developers are not building to the demand that exists in the city, but are building, I guess, in the hopes of more wealthy people moving here, which doesn't help our crisis in the end. But I really can't find significant enough grievance or conflict and defer to Design Review Committee on this. Aye.
Fritz?
Well, yes, I agree with all the thanks to everybody. Just to be clear, though, the previous owner was the one that started it back 3 or 4 years ago. The current application started in April of 2016, and the notice of proposal was April of 2017. So, and the approval criteria are not, is it better than the previous version? It's, does it meet the approval criteria? And does it meet the master plan standards in this case? It seems to me clearly that it doesn't. It encroaches 15 feet into the park area. I don't like the access from the so-called Festival Street. I think that's going to be a major problem with 200 residents maybe calling Uber or somebody else if they can't find places to park their cars, but I think that that's likely to be used quite a lot by the residents. I don't like the 70 feet of essentially dead space fronting onto the plaza of the access only for the residents. I think that doesn't develop the kind of vibrancy that I was hoping for when I voted for the master plan. And with the development agreement for the adjacent park not yet, I'll say finalised, that's accurate, it's not like finalised. It's of concern to me that we're approving this development before having some of the other pieces in place. No.
Fish.
Aye.
Saltzman.
Aye.
Wheeler.
Aye. This is a tentative vote. The motion passes 4-1. The appeal is denied, subject to conditions.
And when will you be coming back to adopt the
And
final?
we will be coming back, Carla, for the final vote.
How long do you need?
How long? So, November 1st, November 2nd? Does that work?
November 1st would be better.
November 1st?
Okay, it'd be 2:45.
And does that
or-
work for you, Mr. Ennis? Yeah. And- okay.
That's good to go?
So,
So,
2:45 then?
what, at time certain, 2:45?
Yes, November 1st.
November 1st at 2:45. And per Portland zoning code, the applicant will be preparing the revised findings in coordination with Bureau of Development Services and the City Attorney's Office.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Saltzman is gone on the afternoon. Would the morning,
Oh, in the morning.
sorry, let's move it to the morning, 11 a.m.
Okay, so the final vote will take place on November 1st, 2017, 11 a.m., Portland City Hall chambers. There being no further business, we are adjourned.